This is Fearless Leadership with Brendan Keegan, a production of Forbes Books. Conversations with leaders who provide valuable, candid insights from their journeys and share their secrets to what made them successful and fearless.
Super excited for this week's Fearless Leader, a person who knows what it takes to become a leader in today's world. Adam Bryant has interviewed hundreds of CEOs and executives and learned from their successes and also their failures. He's currently the Senior Managing Director of the ExCo Group, a firm that helps leaders grow and excel. And he's also the author of the new book, The Leap to Leader: How Ambitious Managers Make the Jump to Leadership. Adam, welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you, Brendan. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, super pumped for this one. I think we're going to have some good banter, some good things for people to take away. Before we get into what you're doing now, I wanted to start by talking about how you created the corner office for the New York Times when you interviewed over 500 CEOs. And how did it start? And were you surprised by its popularity?
Yeah, so the context is I was a journalist for 30 years, 18 years at the New York Times. I spent a lot of years early on as a business reporter, covering different companies, interviewed a lot of CEOs. And I just found the more time I spent with CEOs, the more I wanted to set aside the usual questions about your strategy, your new products, or the macro environment, and just say, like, how do you do what you do? And how do you learn to do what you do? In 2009, I rolled that all up into a very simple what if, which is, what if I sat down with CEOs and never asked them a single question about their companies? And instead, I thought it'd be great to just ask them questions about early influences that really shaped them as a leader, sort of understand them as human beings, key leadership lessons they learned over their career, and all the sort of universal challenges of leadership, like hiring and building teams and culture. So that was the initial what if. My gut told me that it was going to work out, but pretty soon it became, just started snowballing, and I was getting approached by a lot of people to interview their CEOs, and it's just been a really great adventure. I mean, I've heard so many amazing insights and stories, memorable stories, really practical approaches and frameworks for putting those insights into action. And then I left the Times about 6 years ago to join my current firm, the ExCo Group, and I've been continuing with that interview approach on LinkedIn. I've got a few series with CEOs, board directors, heads of HR. And again, always staying focused on, like, what are you learning about leadership in these last few crazy years, and what have been the sort of long-term lessons you've learned?
So, you've interviewed over 500 through your corner office. You just mentioned you have your LinkedIn series. So I'm not going to ask you what your favorite was, because that's too much pressure, but can you tell me one of your favorites, just something that just, out of all those different interviews, that just really stuck out with you that you could share with today's audience?
Sure. Well, a couple of surprises. I mean, things that I know now that I didn't know when I started. So one of the simple questions I ask people is, how do you hire? What questions do you ask in a job interview? And, I have just heard some really surprising and super creative interview questions from CEOs. And at some level, it's not surprising, right? I mean, look, you probably see this all day long, right? People come to you, they've been coached and trained on the right answers. Brendan, my biggest weakness is I care too much and I work too hard, right? It becomes like elevator music. You've heard it all before. So you've got to come up with creative ways to, what I call bank shot questions, like, how do you get around that polished facade to find out what somebody's really like? And those have been some of the biggest surprises. I mean, questions like, if there were no humans on the planet, only animals, what kind of animal would you be? And why? And the why part is more important than the animal itself. One CEO likes to ask people, you think about your parents or whoever raised you, what are the qualities of them that you like the most and the least? And again, I've checked with a lot of HR people. Apparently that doesn't go over the line, comes close to it, but just things like that. That was the biggest surprise. The other thing that I've really discovered, so again, my interviews typically about 1,100 words, publish them every Sunday, did it for 10 years, never missed a week. And what I learned was, what really surprised me is that the interviews were kind of like Rorschach tests or classic ink blots. Because what would invariably happen is, an interview would publish on a Sunday. Next morning, I'd get an email from a reader saying, I've been reading this from the start. That was the best one yet. And then 20 minutes later, I'd be in the cafeteria and a colleague would come up to me unprompted and say, you know, that guy yesterday, I didn't like that guy. And so I just realized, I mean, it's sort of another insight about leadership. I mean, Brendan, you're a leader. Like, some people are going to like you and some people aren't, right? And you sort of have to be your authentic self. And so it was just a powerful reminder that people bring a lot of their own background to leaders, right? Like, you're going to connect with people based on their backgrounds, and some people you're not going to connect with. And it's just sort of another layer of complexity of leadership, which I think is kind of the hardest thing on the planet.
Well, you know, one thing you hit on there is authenticity. And, you know, the company I'm at, you know, we sold last year. We have new owners. And as part of that, we had 3 people that were retiring, just aging out, you know, in their 60s. And as I brought 3 people in and they just did their one last interview with the board, all 3 asked me, you know, what should I do? How should I prepare? What should I do this? And I just said to all of them, just be yourself. You know, you've gotten this far in the process, and I'm a raving fan of yours in the process, and so is everybody else who interviewed you. Don't change. Just be yourself. And I almost saw like this relief, but you talk about the, you know, people getting primed for it, and they have their, you know, their weaknesses disguised as strengths. But I did like your comment there about the bank shot, and I know you're a Toronto guy, so are you a Toronto Raptor fan, basketball fan up there too?
I'm a fan of pretty much all sports. So
okay, that's good. Well, also Toronto, you guys play a little bit of hockey as well.
Exactly.
So I want to get into Leap to Leader, your book, but first, tell me about your day job as senior managing director of the ExCo Group.
The core business of our firm is one-on-one mentoring at the C-suite level. We've got about almost 100 former CEOs and global business leaders who we match up one-on-one as mentors. They're coaches. We call them mentors to people who are like new to the C-suite, maybe new to the CEO job, getting ready for it, C-1, -2. We also do a lot of work with leadership teams to make sure they're operating like true teams. And we also do a lot of cohort work with up-and-coming leaders. And that really is the audience that the book was written for. Those people who maybe in their 30s, early 40s, they've had some management jobs, and the company has said, we see you as a future leader. And I really wanted to sort of try and get in and unpack, like, what does it mean to be a leader? Like, what is the internal game that you have to do, that mindset shift that you need to make to be a leader? And how is it different from management? And I really feel like, you know, I started this book probably 2.5 years ago. Sometimes you just get a lucky tailwind. And I really feel like in this moment, again, I'm preaching to the choir. You see this all day long in your work, Brendan, but so many companies are telling us they need everybody to step up as a leader right now. You know, the day of sort of sitting there and going, okay, please give me the playbook for how to do my job. Like, there's no playbook, right? We're all kind of figuring this out. And everybody needs everybody to lead from their seat and to help write the playbook rather than just, tell me what to do. I don't know how to do this. So.
Yeah, no, if you think of the last 4 years, we had, global pandemic, supply chain, interest rates, inflation, pending recession, labor shortages. So, I'd say the last 4 years, if someone's gone into a leader role, they've really had a chance to develop. They've really had a chance to grow. And I would argue if they didn't grow, it's probably been overwhelming to them the last 4 years.
Yeah, and to your point exactly. I mean, we are seeing there's a lot of people just in the last few years because, this is up for debate, but we can debate how much harder leadership has become in the last few years. But I don't think we can, disagree that it has become harder. I mean, it feels to me like 5 times harder. I don't know, but just there's so many, like with stakeholder capitalism and the blurring of lines between the personal and the professional. And leaders are being told over and over, like all the same words: humanity, authenticity, vulnerability, humility, right? And do that. And meanwhile, like, be super compassionate, right? People are dealing with a lot at home, but you've got to drive performance and you've got to be patient with people, but create a sense of urgency. And so there's just all these challenges that just feel sort of exponential. And I think a lot of people are sort of looking at leadership now and saying, you know what, I didn't sign up for that. I'm out.
Couple other things that you just layer into what you just said is remote, hybrid, and mental health. We've gone through the pandemic and I think mental health has become much more of a discussion, as a result of the pandemic. We weren't meant to be isolated as human beings. And what toll has that taken or not taken, again, debatable, but it's a conversation we're having that I can tell you 4 years ago, we weren't having that conversation. For good or bad, at least in the teams I ran, we weren't talking about his mental health. We were talking about his wellness. Hey, let's take care of ourselves. But we really weren't using mental health as much. Hey, so I do want to tap into a little bit about your book where you talk about the difference between a leader and a manager. And you write about kind of the mindset shift. And you used that word a few minutes ago. So can you talk about the transition from manager to leader with us and the mindset shift and your view on all that?
Sure. The way I think about management is that if you are a manager, you've probably got a boss who's coming to you with sort of expected outcomes that they want you to deliver on. It's like, we need you to manage this project. We need you to get it on time, on budget, and do this. A sort of sense of like, we already know what we need you to do. We just need you to manage the process. So there's sort of that pre-existing set of outcomes. And that's an important skill. We all have to be able to do that and do it well before we can become leaders. But I think the mindset shift is to start looking around and saying, okay, what is the problem that my boss has that I can take off their plate? What is the challenge that the company has that maybe the CEO doesn't even see right now? What are the opportunities that the organization isn't taking advantage of? And having the courage to sort of go outside the job description and to, in effect, make a bet, right? To say, look, I really think this is a huge opportunity or this is a huge problem that needs to be solved. I can solve it. Let me own this. And then you get just this kind of cascading of things that evolve from that in terms of your mentality. Because to me, like, a leader is somebody who has the courage to make decisions, to place bets, right? Because we are in this era where nobody can be certain of anything, right? You have to be able to say, look, I don't have all the information. I cannot guarantee, but my gut says we should try this, and I will own the outcomes. I'll be accountable for it. But at some point, you got to kind of pound the table a bit and say, look, we really need to do this. And that's what leaders do, is sort of having your convictions, your courage around them, and owning the outcomes.
Yeah, use one of my favorite words, courage. I love that word. So as someone transitions from manager to leader, they kind of go into their first management job, and as they develop, what are some of the things you think, though, that they need to master, to become very competent at before they really progress to that leadership? Because it's not just about leading. You still have to do that management. But are there some competencies after doing all the interviewing, the expertise you have, that you would say, hey, these are things you just got to have in your toolbox?
Yeah. And to be a great manager, starts with a couple of things. And, as I get older, Brendan, I find myself, I like sentences that would begin, there's only two kinds of people, right? If it's a smart way of creating a framework and simplifying the complexity. But in my experience, just over my career, I find you can put managers and bosses into two camps. Like, there are those who are kind of more self-centered, right? It's all about them. They sort of see the people who work for them just as like assets to help them achieve their personal goals. The other end, there's people who are more selfless, right? They sort of look at their employees and say, how can I help you? And I see this amazing trajectory for your career, and I want to help you get there. And they're about helping the organization. And so I think that's really where you need to start as a manager and say, what kind of person am I and do I want to be? Because when we've all worked for bosses who are self-centered, it's all about them. You tend not to trust them, right? You're not going to go out of your way to help them. You don't really want to follow them. And so to me, that's the starting point. But then you kick into some of the basic skills of managing people. I think one of them is literally just having the conversation, because so many people are uncomfortable having those difficult conversations, right? Giving people feedback, stuff can so easily just build up, get swept under the rug. People say, well, maybe they're just having a bad day, or I'll bring that up in the performance review 9 months from now. And again, you probably learned this approach too, like, feedback is always better delivered right away. And I think you need to kind of desensitize people to it. And I think you need to be explicit about that and just say, you get a new hire and say, hey, by the way, I really like to give you feedback. I feel like it's my job to give you feedback. I'm going to tell you when you do something really well, and I'm going to tell you when, you can do something better. And I think as long as everything that you say comes from this place of, I'm here to coach you. I believe in you and I want you to get better. And if you want to get to the next level, you need to know these things. I think people are going to be much more open to that feedback as opposed to seeing it as criticism, because it is, I do find it puzzling sort of in our lives, right? Like when you're coming up as a kid, you go to school, your teachers give you feedback, you play sports or you dance or whatever, you got, coaches and instructors giving you feedback. You pay a lot of money to go to college to have a professor give you feedback, but you get into the work world and it's like, wait a minute, Brendan, are you giving me feedback? It's like, wait a minute, right? And people kind of get their back up. They don't really listen. They tend to shut down. So as much as you can disarm people, I think that's like a huge part of just being a good manager, is being willing to have those tough conversations and do it in a way that feels like you've got the person's best interest at heart.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about here at my company, I talk about bite-sized coaching in the moment. In that, let's say someone, and this just happened yesterday, somebody didn't do a great job presenting in a meeting. And as you're walking to the next meeting, just grab them and say, hey, content was good, everything was really good. Hey, just presentation was a little off today. Next time, just think about bringing a little bit more energy, bring your personality. You were a little stiff in there. Oh God, Brendan, I was so nervous and I wasn't prepared. Everything. I go, no problem. But you're doing it right then. And by the way, then you might find out there was a reason, and you might be like, okay, so that actually wasn't them underperforming. There was, hey, I totally agree. I wasn't prepared. I found out 5 minutes before that I was the presenter. Then you sit there and go, oh, okay, that's a very different situation. But one thing I've found is if you're going to do that, it's patience. It's not, hey, you didn't do a good job presenting, because that's a different message. It's that patience that you have with the message. But I think we all know the closer you can coach to the moment, the higher retention. Because, if I tell you 3 months from now, Adam, I didn't see you as good a presenter this year, you might be like, oh, interesting. Could you tell me when? It's nebulous. Like then you're sitting there, you might go to one presentation and you did a good job, and I might go to another. So I love your thoughts there of just in doing it with empathy and kindness, but with the intent of, I'm trying to make you better.
Right. And, to the point about sort of in the moment, I interviewed Carol Bartz, who used to be the CEO of Yahoo many years ago. And she called it the puppy theory of feedback. She says, like, if a puppy pees on the carpet, you don't tell it 2 days later, hey, you shouldn't have peed, right? Like they're going to look at you like, what are you talking about? So just do it in the moment. And because I think you don't want your employees always wondering, like, what are you thinking? They should be clear about what you're thinking, because then you can focus on the work instead of trying to like read your boss's body language all the time.
So, a couple other topics I wanted to discuss with you is, oftentimes I talk about the difference between getting to the C-suite, if you will, or getting promotions isn't IQ, it's EQ. And my guess is almost everybody listening today probably has enough IQ to get wherever they want to go, because they've found this podcast. So they probably have the IQ, but to get where they want to go, it's about EQ. So how does somebody develop a high level of like self-awareness and EQ? And you've had a chance to meet with many people that have high EQ. Any coaching you'd give to the folks listening today?
Yeah, I think a lot about self-awareness, and it is so important, right? And we've all met people who aren't self-aware. They don't understand, in their mind, they're sort of coming at something with good intent, but everybody's sort of reading them like, you sound like a jerk, right? And so it's just so important to be really clear. And I think if you unpack the idea, what is self-awareness? And I think it's at a simple level, it's you kind of understand your strengths and weaknesses, right? That's how we tend to define it. And then I think the sort of PhD level of self-awareness is that you can get into other people's heads and see yourself through their eyes. And if you're always trying to do that, so self-awareness to me, it's, I always use the metaphor in leadership of Russian nesting dolls, because I think so many concepts sort of nest inside each other. And I think self-awareness and empathy are really tied together, right? Because if you have empathy, which means, okay, I can sort of get inside your head and see the world through your eyes. If you have that muscle, if you have that skill, you can see yourself through their eyes, right? Everybody has that challenge of closing the gap between how they think they're showing up in the world and how people are perceiving them, right? And that gap is always going to be there. And I think at some at some levels, some leaders, like there is a huge gap, right? They think they're showing up a certain way and people aren't decoding them that way. And in this context, perception is reality, right? It doesn't matter what you think. Like if you say, a lot of people think I'm a jerk, but I'm really a nice guy. It doesn't matter that you think you're a nice guy. Like you're a jerk, right? And so as much as you can, I think you really want to sort of work all your blind spots. You have those confidants who can tell you, it's like, look, you didn't show up like I know you want to in that meeting. I've talked to leaders who say to their teams, like, it is your responsibility to help me work my blind spots, right? And that can be blind spots strategically. It can also be blind spots culturally. You're not spending enough time with this team. They're sort of feeling left out. But if you can sort of, first of all, acknowledge that as a human being, you have your blind spots, and then empower your team and say, I need your help to guard against these things and give me honest feedback and build that sort of trusted network of people who can really tell you what's going on. I think that's such a key part of self-awareness. And in terms of like, how do you move up quickly? I always, try to frame things in very simple terms. And one of the sections of the book is basically how to get promoted without ever asking for a promotion, right? And I get it. I mean, I put an asterisk there and say that may be unrealistic because some people, you probably do need to advocate for yourself. But I think you should start there, which was just ask yourself, what would it take to keep getting promoted without having to ever ask for a promotion? And that starts with just doing like an overwhelmingly good job, not only the job you're given, but to transform the job you have, to take stuff off your boss's plate, to look for opportunities above your pay grade that are going to help the organization. I think another really simple way to set yourself apart is what one CEO calls the do to say ratio, which means what percentage of the things that you say you're going to do you actually do on a consistent basis, right? And you think about all the people on your teams and all the people, all the listeners have worked with over their careers. There are some people who they say they're going to do something and you don't have to think about it anymore, right? Because they're going to do it, right? That report's going to be there on your desk Thursday morning. And then there's other people who say, yeah, I'll get that to you Thursday morning. And you're just saying to yourself, no, you're not, right? And you just know you're going to have to follow up. And it's just this idea of being that person who always says what you're going to do. And if you can, you tell people, it's like, look, I'm going to miss that deadline for these following reasons. But if you are that person, you are going to set yourself apart as being reliable, dependable, trustworthy. People are going to want you on their team, and you're going to get promoted so darn quickly. And I always ask people, it's like, look in the mirror and be brutally honest with yourself. What is your do to say ratio? How good are you at this? And if you want to get better at it, there's a really simple hack, which is whenever you say you're going to do something, make a note to yourself, right? On your phone, on your computer, on a Moleskine, whatever you use. But if it's really easy, it's just every time something comes out of your mouth where I will do X, write it down and make sure you follow up. And you'll just find like the promotions are going to come so quickly.
Yeah, Adam, I got to tell you, I probably get asked once a day, like, how do I get ahead? How do I get ahead? Something to that end. And I got my little book here. And, some people say, oh, Brendan's got his little black Bible over there. And I got to tell you, writing it down, I like a notebook. Lots of people have, apps and different things. I've tried apps every year and I go back to the written word. It's just, it works with me. But I stress to people, just write it down. Like, if in a meeting, at 11, you said, hey, I'll get that to you Friday. You've got 3 other meetings, but maybe by the end of the day, you forget about it. I just want to add one thought to what you said. I agree with everything. Proactive. And proactive can be, hey, on Monday, I'm going to miss Friday's deadline. That's okay. But what's not okay is Friday morning, hey, we're going to miss the deadline. So when are they going to come in? Next Friday. It's like, well, you probably knew that before this morning. Or just proactive. Hey, you asked me to do X. I wrote it down. I did X. But I actually, you ask someone to do, hey, go do a competitive review of this company. And they go, I did. By the way, here's another competitor I did as well. And you're like, wow, but it's just, I tell people it's little things. It's not this big thing, but be proactive. And proactive can be do more, do differently, raise your hand for a special project. It could be anything, but I think if you're reactive, you're kind of putting yourself in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, exactly. And just picking up on what you just said, it's like table stakes is do what you say you're going to do. And then if you go above and beyond and do what nobody asked you to do, like, again, like these simple things, like, as you say, it's the little things, you can set yourself apart. I'm always telling, college grads, I say, look, it is so much easier. It is getting easier and easier to set yourself apart from the pack because there are too many people who don't follow the basics. The do to say ratio, being proactive, listening. We could talk about that, but I feel like with our devices and, it's like the basic skill of listening, I feel like is becoming a dying art. But if you do those things well, you're just going to have this like really sharp trajectory, I think.
Yeah. So I got one more question for you as we close, but just one comment. So I had an intern this summer and, we had 10 interns in the company and one said, if I want to stand apart, I said, well, how many days are you remote? He goes, well, we're remote 2 days a week and we're in the office 3 days a week. I said, come in every day. That's it. Just come in every day. And interesting enough, so many people said, that person did such a great job. And I think people felt they did such a great job. They just saw them more. And yet he could have said, but I'm allowed to be home 2 days a week. You are? Sure. Absolutely. But if you're young in your career, part of getting a promotion is being known. If leaders in other departments don't know you, don't see you, it's virtually impossible for somebody if you're in Division A, it's almost impossible for someone in Division B, Division C, Function D to know who you are. And that was advice I got literally on the first day of my career by a gentleman by the name of Jeff Howell, the president of EDS. He said, for us to promote you, we have to know you. Make sure you're known.
Right. What you just said is one reason why the subtitle of the book, I said, how ambitious managers make the jump to leadership. Because look, last few years, the whole sort of quiet quitting, great resignation. I mean, there's stories every day about how people are redefining their relationship with work. And I would say like no judgments, right? Like if you're not ambitious, you don't want to get ahead, that's fine. No judgments. But if you do want to get ahead, you got to show your employer something. You've got to go above and beyond the job description you were handed.
Okay. So to our leaders out there, when they have to make a decision and it's unclear what the right decision is, what the wrong decision is, they've gotten a certain amount of information, not perfect information, and they're wrestling with their own fear, uncertainty, and doubt of if I'm wrong or if I'm right or I'm doubting this, or what advice would you have to a leader in that situation?
The first message is you have to have the courage to make a decision. And I've just heard from so many leaders how, again, it sort of sounds simple, make the decision. But a lot of people don't have the courage to do that, right? Or they wait until they want to get all the information before they make the decision. And then your competitor is just blown by you. And, I interviewed one CEO. He said, whenever I move into a new company to take over a new team and I'm deciding who on leadership stays or goes, like, a big part of what I'm looking for is, can you actually make a decision? A, understanding the importance of it, and B, realizing that part of the courage of making a decision is being able to make the decision when you don't have all the data, right? As much as you'd like to make sure it's going to be the right decision and how could we analyze this and study it and get 100%, it's just not going to work. And so just realizing that there is a lot of gray areas. And I would say, like, if I had a magic wand, I'd probably get rid of the word strategy from all corporations and discussions, and I would replace it with the word bets. Because I think if we're being honest with ourselves, that's what companies do, right? They make bets on the way the economy is going, consumer behavior, client preferences, new technology, right? You're basically saying, I have this thesis about where the world is going to break, and we're going to put resource against it. And to me, that captures much better right now the spirit of this moment we're living in. Maybe when the world was more stable, you could do a strategy document and say, okay, here's a spreadsheet. We're taking it out 10 years to the 5th decimal point of expected ROI, right? But nobody's going to buy that anymore. And I think just with yourself and, for leaders who are running organizations, if you can shift the culture more to understanding that you are in the business of bets, I think it gives a much more realistic framework of the environment. Like, make the bet, and if it doesn't work out, let's learn from it and move on. So to me, that's like a huge part. Like, have the courage to make the decision, realize you're never going to get it all. And also, like, you can't get everything right. I mean, there's so many leaders who beat themselves up, right? And people who get in top leadership roles, they tend to be really high performers. They hold themselves to a really high standard. And that's great. And all those things help them get where they are. But at some point, you've got to shift into like the mind of being a baseball player, right? Like if you're hitting 350, you got a great average. You're not going to get everything right. You shouldn't beat yourself up. And there's a great expression I heard from one of our mentors, a guy named Bob Brennan. And when he's mentoring sort of young CEOs who might be beating themselves up, he always says to them, if you talk to your friends the way you talk to yourself, you wouldn't have any friends. And to me, that's like just a great insight, right? Like, just give yourself a break. You're not going to get everything right. Just move on. And I really think that's one of the things that is special about the way entrepreneurs are wired, which is just like, look, we got bad news, but where's the opportunity? Let's not dwell on the bad news. I made a mistake. Fine, move on. What's plan B, C, and D? This is good information. Let's keep going. And I think that's a really productive mindset.
Yeah. So, hey, if we were together doing this in my office, you'd see a saying on the wall that's kind of been my motto for my career. And actually, I'd say life. And it's have the courage to fail and the faith to succeed. To willingly go into a situation saying I might fail takes courage, but you also then have to have faith that, I'm going to place these bets. And more times than not, I'm going to succeed. And I'm going to be okay when I fail. But, you got to go in saying, I'm placing this bet and I'm going to win. I'm going to succeed. And, the other thing is, as you're going through and it starts to fail, it's good to be self-aware and say, hey, this wasn't the best idea. It's time to move on. So this has been great. Like I have learned so much. I actually have half a page of notes here of things I'm going to be sending out to my team. Everything from puppies to if your self-talk were to your friends, you wouldn't have friends. So I've got a half a page of notes here, Adam. So I appreciate that, and I hope our audience does as well. So thanks for being with us today, Adam Bryant, author of The Leap to Leader, How Ambitious Managers Make the Jump to Leadership, Senior Managing Director of the ExCo Group. Buy that book. It's fabulous. I had a chance to read it. That's what brought us to meeting today. And when you're out there, practice your fearless leadership and some of the lessons you learned today from Adam. Thank you.
This has been Fearless Leadership with Brendan Keegan. If you want to learn to live and lead fearlessly, go to brendanpkeegan.com. Fearless Leadership is a production of Forbes Books.